Hello, welcome to Too Old for This Shite, a podcast where we just talk about things we're probably too old to be talking about. Like nappies.
Ew.
Actually, it's a fucking thing with it. You can't. This is a real old person rant. You can't do anything now without it being some weird fetish somewhere, or say something like that. Think of like, say when we were like Pampers. It's like you think of like old men in nappies just being weird.
Or maybe they just are incontinent and need nappies.
Well, yeah, but either way, yeah, welcome to the podcast. This week we're going to be talking about, I suppose, some of our adventures in wargaming, mostly outside of the Warhammer thing, because just it's like, I have a blog as well, which no one reads. So
Except
if you want to read it, yeah. And we have podcasts as well that no one listens to. So if you're after coming across either one of them, check the other one out. Explain how that's done if you're reading the blog. I don't know. But over on the blog, just to get started, I'm kind of going through kind of a history of my adventures in Warhammer from when I was a very, very small boy.
To a not so small boy. Slightly bigger boy.
Jumpers for goalposts. And basically it was just like getting to the point where we had a couple of games of Agent Sigmar ages ago, and I think we might have even done Necromunda at one point, and I think you just weren't into it, and as well I wasn't really into it either. The gameplay was a bit meh. So we went off and tried other games. So we tried one-page rules mainly and Battletech. It was a bit, I think probably from the time I bought the Battletech stuff to the time we played it was probably 2 years.
Minimum, I'd say. Yeah.
Because like there was other things, and it was just as well, I don't know, like it's Battletech. It just gets out like the way I started on the blog, but one of the things why I went for Battletech is if you ask over on Reddit or another forum, is what alternatives are there to Warhammer? And mostly 40k, because ages ago people were like, oh, it happens the whole time with 40k. People are, I'm fucking sick of Games Workshop changing the rules and they're Predator, they're too expensive. Oh, there's always some fucking outroar over one thing or another.
Someone whinging about
something.
Something.
And then people are like, right, I'm fucking off. I'm kind of go off and get something with like, hookers and fucking blackjack. And one of the top recommendations that comes a lot is Battletech. One-page rules, another one as well. And depending if you're going for fantasy, Kings of War, there's a lot of them, but like Battletech comes up an awful lot because people say it's been around for longer than Warhammer. It's got like not so much a similar lore, but like a dense lore that might be attractive to people that aren't into it. Then for one of the things that people don't like about Warhammer, particularly 40k, is how there's constant updates. Now in gaming terms, if you're a video gamer, that's a great thing because it's like, oh well, they're balancing things, they're making it better the whole time.
Add new content.
Yeah, they do this on Warhammer 40k because it's more focused on, I suppose, the competitive gamer now. And quite obviously this is what people want and they've been asking for. So Warhammer are giving it to them, and then people are like, oh, people forget you don't have to keep up with the updates.
Exactly.
You can just
play by yourself.
You can play the last thing. You don't have to put
friends.
these things into it and that. It's no one's forcing you. Games Workshop definitely aren't. Even a lot of times when they do an update, if they kick out things from it, they're like, it's in the Legends category now. If you and your friends want to play with that model and that unit, that's fine. But it's just when we're hosting competitive events where there might be money on, this is not part of it. So it's fair enough.
But it is, but it seems like, I'm obviously very much on the outside of all this, being that I'm not a huge fan of any of this kind of thing originally. But it just, I know when you were talking about this, I was kind of like, but why do people feel that they can't still play with the models they own?
Yeah, no, this is what I'm saying.
What I mean?
Yeah,
it's just, it was baffling.
But that's it. Games Workshop never say to someone, you can't play with this model anymore. You can't use this. All that they're saying is, for the competitive one.
Oh no, I get you. But
you cannot use
everyone
it. Yeah.
seems to be bitching like that's the case. But it's like you could just play.
I think
with
there's
it.
a certain
They're
type
not
of people.
standing in your house watching.
Yeah, but I think there's a certain type of people that have this mentality where it's like, oh no, I have to do it because like someday I might be in the Warhammer World Championships, or I want to do it. And like it's a very small percentage of people that are like caught up in the like super competitive play, but people, I think they get, I used to see it with like gaming. online game, and people were like, oh, I have to get this, I have to get that, I have to do this tactic and that tactic to keep in with the meta. There's a certain group of people that just get caught up with that, whereas like the majority of people that play Warhammer are playing for a narrative kind of thing, or they're just playing it for fun. I think I saw a survey where they said that it was like around, I think most people only play once every 6 months or whatever. So I don't get where all the big push about competitive play comes into, but I suppose there is that thing where people have it, like it's like with people buying up loads and loads of models, because you don't buy them for the now, you buy them for the future, going, oh well, I'm going to be building an army on this, so I want to have all these in place so I can do, so it's always a kind of like when I get time.
Yeah, in the
I
future,
think same as any hobby.
Yeah.
With stuff where you always buy things, or books, you never, like, I mean, I got hundreds of books which I probably
You're
never
never
will
going to
read.
read. You're never going to have the time to read.
Yeah,
even.
because you get them kind of go, when I have the time, it'll be great. I'll sit down and I'll read that one, But then you get something in between that and that distracts you, and it's just human nature.
I do think, though, as well, there's probably a large cohort of people who are into the likes of Warhammer and all the rest. They like the nature of following rules. So if Warhammer does come up with something and they say this is the way you should do it, they're kind of like, okay, well, that's the way we should do it.
Yeah.
It's like very much, right, if I follow the rules, this is the way, and you get enjoyment from following the rules.
Well, I was looking at an interesting video there a while ago where someone going through, I think it was Tabletop Titans, I think they were called, but they were going through all the various editions of 40k. Now, we'll break that 40k is very different from Age of Sigmar. I think they have similar mechanics. Age of Sigmar is a bit easier, I think, to play, or I don't know that there's just a different vibe too. But they were going through the different editions of Warhammer 40k over the years, and it's gas. It's like every single edition, same thing. The new edition comes out, people are like, oh, it's not as good as the old edition. Then people go, well, actually, no, it's better. And then what starts happening is Games Workshop start releasing codexes, which are books for the armies, the specific armies, and then because there's all these new rules get introduced over a 3 or 4 year period, the game gets a little bit more complex, and then it's a little bit more uneven, so they're trying to balance things a little bit better, so they change rules here and there, and they change small rules, and then people are going, oh my god, this is just a mess. And then a new edition comes out and starts all over again, and it seems to have been pretty much like that since the 3rd edition, or maybe the 4th edition, so you're talking maybe a good 20 years of the same thing, but people seem to keep forgetting that the cycle just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. But anyway, that's besides the point.
What is the point?
We're starting off saying that we went away from Warhammer because I think we were playing a few games of Age of Sigmar and stuff, and it just wasn't really...
Wasn't setting your world on fire.
Yeah. So it was just like, all right. Now this was probably 2nd edition Age of Sigmar, maybe into 3rd edition. I can't really remember, but it was a while ago anyway. So picked up Battletech. Then like I was saying, about 2 years later after picking it up, because it was, in fairness, it was like I'd look at a video about the rules of it and kind of go, fuck that.
That's a lot to take.
Yeah, and as well there was part of it where it's like, right, I'm kind of starting to get it, but if I have to, because Laura's not going to look at one of these videos, or you're not going to read the rules, so I have to try and get to the point where I can
understand it enough to explain it to me.
Yeah, and then get you interested in it. So it's not. So I think that's a good kind of mark for things. If rules are so bad that you can't actually explain them to people, maybe they're just not
they're
that
not
good,
concise enough. Yeah, they're not that clear.
But
Clearly.
after 2 years of looking at videos and
You
reading
finally
rule
felt,
books,
yes,
I
able
think
to
it was just,
explain.
I was like, look, let's just fucking have a go at it. So we had to go at it. And I suppose, what did you think of Battletech?
I love you went into great detail about this, that, and the other in an explanation of the rules, and then at the end of it was just like you came up with like they're just two big robots and they're trying to kill each other, and that was pretty much your summation of it. So I was like, oh, okay, that sounds kind of interesting. But what I didn't realise was it was literally...
Yeah, I didn't want to say, hey, do you like statistics and tables?
Yeah, because I clearly don't. But yeah, it kind of felt like I was like going off to work for the day, because it was like, right, okay, now you got to sit down and very, very slowly you have to turn your robot on this hexagonal fucking square and face it another way, and then you're able to shoot like two little things and do pop pop and two little bits of damage. I was just like, oh my god.
I will give it that like the whole idea behind Battletech, so like it is one of these things. It's nearly like a fucking Simpson sketch, where it's like, hey, do you like robots battling each other to the death? And you can kick another robot in the head, and you can do this and rip their arms off or something. Or like, yeah, and then it's like, but to get to that point, you have to roll thousands of dice.
Yes.
Go compare loads of different tables and charts and.
Yeah, you see, I think it's probably very useful for the people who are minded that way. They're mathematically minded, or they're interested in like military operations. And I mean, something like that would actually prepare you for, I don't know, if you're going into the army. Well, no, but what I'm getting at is if you're going
I've
into
seen
the army,
Platoon and stuff, and I don't think playing BattleTech would.
but everyone thinks, it's just like fucking run around in the field with a gun or something like that. But if you're in the Navy or something like that, it's just like plotting fucking charts and you know all of this kind of stuff. And
they're
like
not rolling the dice, going kind of like, oh damn, we missed.
I know, but it kind of gets you into the headspace, I suppose. Of like, well, okay,
you see, it's
campaign is very much. It's not all fucking just like Leroy Jenkins. And you burst in and start shooting everywhere. It's like
it's meant to be fun. Like a game is meant to be fun, I think, first and foremost. And the whole thing with BattleTech is one of the main draws, or one of the main reasons why people recommend it to people from Warhammer as well, is like, because the rules, this is where we're getting to, because the rules changed so much in Warhammer, the rules have been pretty much the same in Battletech for 40 years. So it's not like you have to worry about a new edition of Battletech coming out anytime soon, or rules changing dramatically. But the whole thing is, people don't say, well, you know, the rules are fairly fucking different from, they're very much like early Warhammer. Warhammer Fantasy, they remind me an awful lot of, which... It's an 80s, it's an old system where it is all this comparing tables and having like, what was one of it, was a fucking rotor or gator, that was the thing. You have to use this thing where it's like, you add up a load of different variables. So whether, if the person moved, say it's like 1, then their gunnery skill, which could be like 4, and all this. And did you move? What's your fighting thing? Like, did your pilot have a shit before he went out and the thing, you know, all this stuff. And then you have to score over that with your dice roll. So when we were playing, at first we were like, fuck it. And then kind of like maybe round 2 we were getting it. But then you have to try and remember all the things that you have to add up, because it's like, it is 5 or 6 different things. So you have to keep going back checking on what it is. And then when you start, you're losing, your attention starts going and you start getting tired, or it's more of a chore, and you're like, fucking, did you move that time? Did I?
Like,
what the fuck is going on?
Just consult my Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah. And it goes on for a long, long time. That was the thing that grated me the most, I think, about it, because I should have said before, what Battletech is, in case anyone doesn't know. I presume if you're listening to this, you know what Battletech is. There's less models than, say, 2000 point Warhammer fucking game. So you could have like 4 mechs fighting each other on, instead of like an open table, it's like Laura was saying, a hexagonal fucking square,
it's like a
grid
kind of a thing.
And you can move on that, like, so say 1 kind of over, but the turns are included in it. I quite like that. I thought, alright, like, that takes certain things but looks ugly. It's not as immersive, I think, as if you have like when we were playing Age of Sigmar, there is something nice about having like all the different kind of like terrain out there.
Well,
and
it kind of feels, even though you're restricted in your movement on it, like to say like, oh, you can only move 8 inches or whatever, it still feels more like open world and you're in charge of your destiny. Whereas this thing is like, well, you can only turn like 1 rotation, and it just feels very.
It feels like an old computer game.
Yeah, or it feels kind of like chess or something like that, where it's like, well, you're locked into these very very set formations of movement, and you can't move too far, and you've got to, you know, sort of. You know, you can't just like, oh, I'm going to do a jump and I'm going to kick your head off. It's like, nope, I have to slowly. It's like fucking Space Invaders, very, very slowly advancing.
That's the thing. It's kind of like about that. I suppose getting straight into it, that we didn't really like about it was that it's fucking boring and it takes an awful long time. So I decided that when we're starting off that we'd only have 2 mechs. I think in the box set there's 8 mechs, so it's 4 mechs each. So I thought 2 mechs each.
Quick
probably
game.
Be a half an hour
Quick
long.
game.
It'll be quick.
Yeah.
I think it was 3 hours.
3 days later.
Yeah, we were actually playing it for, and I think at that point it was only after destroying one of your mechs, and that wasn't even properly. I
think you're only after blowing off one of their arms, and that was it.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, oh my god, we still have another arm and 2 legs and a head and a body. Jesus Christ, okay,
because there's so many variables in it. So the way you don't, like, say in Warhammer, the way it's like your little fella has his health score. So it's like when that's gone, he's dead. It's not like, oh, you did 1 damage to his leg and 5 damage to his fucking left testicle. And that's what it is in Battletech. It's like, all right, you're after doing like a certain amount of damage, and they all have different amounts. So an arm could have 10 hits on it. A leg could have 50 hits on it, and the head, it's, you can't pick where you're going to hit either. It's random. So what we found was that you were randomly hitting different points. So it's like
It's like a more boring version of like Battleship.
Yeah.
And that's essentially all it is, except you can see the other.
But you can pick in Battleship. So this, if I wanted to blow your arm off, it's not up to me that I can blow your arm off. It's up to the dice. So it's like, so what was happening was, say I'd get 2 damage on your arm, then say the next turn I might get 2 damage on your back. Then it was like going on like that for ages, where it's like, I'm fucking doing no damage.
Yeah.
So now if you're into kind of saying, all right, I want to play a 6-hour long game, or probably a 10-hour long game,
this is a game for you.
Now, people say that the strategic, I don't know, maybe we were too stupid that we didn't realise that there's some way that you can actually aim and pick out certain shots that you can do.
Well, you could. I seem to remember when we were doing it, it's like, well, if you face this way, like you can kind of aim.
Oh, yeah, you could aim certain sides, but you have to get around them. But it would be incredibly difficult to do, I think, or you need faster kind of robots to do it. But at the same point,
like the robots are like sentient and stuff. It's like they're fucking models on their fucking. It's like, you need them to be faster. It's like, they're not alive,
They might be, but they are. But it was just like at the end of it, the two of us were instantly never again. Never again.
That's, I'm kind of the opinion that these kind of things, they're meant to be fun. You're playing a game, it's meant to be enjoyable. This felt more like being back in school and you're doing a fucking maths class or a history class or something, and you're just like plod, and you're just like, Jesus Christ, looking out the window at the birds singing outside and the sun shining, and meanwhile it's all doom and gloom and rainy inside in the classroom, and you're just like, I'll never get out.
One of the things I will give it with the combat was, I thought the resource or the heat management was kind of cool on it, where it's like, every time you fire a missile, there's a certain amount of heat builds up, or if you move, the heat builds up in your robot. So you can't let it get to a certain point, or else it kind of has a negative impact on your thing. But what I also found was that if you do the bare minimum what you're going to do, you just don't go into the heat thing. So it's fairly easy to manage, really. Yeah, well, the flip side of that is, okay, it is an interesting thought and an interesting kind of thing to have to deal with. But on the flip side, oh my God, how fucking dull. It's like, oh no, it's like, I think I've overheated my robot ever so slightly, I better slow it down. It's like, oh Jesus But
Christ.
it's, well, like, the negative effects for doing it weren't like drastic, where it should have been, oh my God, your fucking balls explode. Instead it was like, well, you take a -1 to your kind of like movement every fifth movement, and you're like, fifth movement?
That's the thing, I mean, it's like, the only thing I can compare it to is like Ents having a conversation.
Yeah.
It's like, anything that's worth saying takes a long time to say, and it's like, well, this actually isn't all that worthwhile.
No,
I didn't think
that was the thing. Like, I mean, a lot of people as well. Like,
because there's no, again, you mentioned the narrative and stuff like that in Warhammer. There's like, from what I could see, there was just like, the narrative was like, you have a mech and I have a mech, and let's try and destroy each other's mechs. There was no overarching. Now maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a whole deep lore universe.
This is what I was going to say. There is, the lore is as big, if not as bigger than, say, Warhammer 40k. But I tried to get into it. I mean, like I said to you, I got the Humble Bundle book bundle, which had every fiction book that's ever been written for 16 quid, which is ridiculous for like 100 books or whatever. I still haven't read one of them, because at the time it was like, oh my God, that's a great deal, and now I'm like, I don't really care about the universe that much. So like with the universe of Battletech, it's like mankind went off to the stars. It sounds very cool. Then we had like a time of prosperity. We had these battle mechs that were kind of, people were using. It was nearly like a nuclear deterrent. Then people started acting the bollocks, and fucking wars kicked off, and then we went into a dark age of like, where there was no technological advances, because there was so much war over hundreds of years. So the Battletech or battle mechs were like one of the last things to survive. So you have like these mercenaries having certain units, so it's people are fighting. Then one of the good guys that were fucked off years ago, he went off to another planet and basically started genetically modifying people, and they're like Nazis, and they come back at one point called the Clan Wars, and they have more advanced technology in their fight. And that's like only part of it. But it's all very, I think, war.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, the cool thing about what I think make Warhammer, they'd say 40k cool compared to other sci-fi settings, is it's fucking horribly grim. You got demons, you got aliens, you got fucking everything in it. So the whole thing is like, right, you don't like these space marine guys that are superheroes in fucking suits, but there's also this religious aspect to it where it's like, well, these are actually seen by angels, by some people who worship them. And kind of like, maybe they are angels. Maybe it's like our notion of angels was based on these like advanced races of people that came down and were like, you know, really racist and hated Xenos, like in Warhammer. But then you have like the aliens. The aliens are very distinct from each other. Like the orcs are so different from the elves, even though it basically is just fantasy in space. But then the demons.
I see, that's the thing. I was only saying it to you there recently. Like, I mean, you could not pay me enough money to sit down and just paint a whole a fuck ton of like fucking miniatures if they're just like all space marines, because essentially it is an army, so they're going to have to be uniform, and it's like, oh my god, I could think of nothing more boring. But for someone like me who clearly has no fucking attention span and wants something a little bit more sort of off the wall, there's plenty, like there's all the Nurgle fellas, and there's all, you know, all the sort of, like you said, there's goblins, there's orcs, there's Nighthaunt, there's all these other fantasy creatures that you can be creative and you can kind of go, oh, I'll just put my own little spin on it. It doesn't matter if they all look the same.
But those are in 40k as well. But what I'm saying, you compare that to Battletech.
That's what I
with
mean.
the lore
What
as well,
gonna,
where it's just people killing each other.
Yeah.
Really, essentially what it is. So, like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, there is something wrong with people killing each other, but you know, it's just like, it's
but that's the thing. Like, I mean, it works in like say Battlestar Galactica or something like that. Where you're like, oh,
but you had the Cylons in Battlestar Galactica.
You do.
Seeing this, it is just people. There's no aliens. There's no. There might be robots in it, but I don't think there's any. You know, whereas there's a whole history, and even in like Warhammer, there's this whole thing where it was like how it fell into an age of technological darkness is because we created AI. Now this was written in the fucking 80s, remember? And the AI they got like the Men of Iron. It was ripped off from fucking Terminator, because Warhammer in the 80s basically just used to rip off things from everywhere.
Yeah.
So they were like, hey, Terminator is cool. Yeah. There was a lot of Judge Dredd design in a lot of Warhammer stuff. But yeah, so they were like, oh yeah, the Men of Iron went to war against, and then when we defeated them, they were like, right, that's it. No one touches a fucking computer again, or you're fucking dead. Look what happened the last time, you stupid bastards. So the nice thing about that was that it led to this whole thing where people kind of like placed magical fucking things into technology, and it became a religion. So you see in some trailers or things where like guns are seen as holy relics and shit in Warhammer, whereas like I think that's a nice, interesting spin on it. Whereas with BattleTech, it's nearly too realistic.
Yeah, it's kind of like, oh, shooty, there you go.
Yeah.
And again, like, I mean, as I said, I don't want to sound like I'm kind of like coming down on this and just fucking stupid. It's just, it's not up my street.
Yeah, same with me, like, yeah.
I am very much like fucking, I suppose the best way of describing it is the time I decided I was going to be all creative and I was going to start like making all these clothes, and I bought a sewing machine. But then I realised you had to like follow patterns to make any sense, and you have to like measure exactly, even taking up hems. And I was like, fuck that, I'll take a guess and I'll hazard a guess. And I ended up like sewing things together and fucking, you know, ending up with one-legged jeans, and I was just like, oh, guess this is not for me. So I'm very much about like something you can do quickly, something you can kind of just jump into without having to do like 10 years worth of research, or that they're not entirely and utterly rigidly encased by rules that you have to follow. Because I found even the Battletech filling out the sheets, and I'm kind of like, you have to kind of like scratch off like the little dots as you get, and I'm just like, oh my god, this feels like a fucking test that you don't remember those tests you used to get at school where they used to run it through. The fucking like a dot matrix kind of a thing, and it's just like, oh, it feels like I'm just back at school again doing homework.
But it's one of the confusing, and it's not even so much confusing about the lore, but it's like, say in Warhammer, it's like there is a timeline that's continuous in Warhammer. Now, if you wanted, you could kind of, because there's like, say, old Warhammer, which is like the Horus Heresy, but where it's like 10,000 years before, but the models are slightly different, and it's a different setting. So it's, they kind of think of it as being like a historical war game set in the Warhammer universe, but Warhammer kind of follows a storyline. So if you're playing it now, you're playing it with the current story events happen, whereas in Battletech it doesn't seem to be like that. It's like you can play at any point in time, but if you're playing at this point in time, which a lot of people like, the clan wars, like I was talking about with the clanners coming back, you can only play with certain mechs from that era. So for a new person who doesn't know the lore, it's kind of nearly asking that you know all the lore before you decide where you're going to play, instead of just saying, all right, look, you're fucking here. Everyone is here. Every mech that's available is available to everyone. Do whatever you want. Now, you can do that, of course, probably, but it's just when you're getting into it is put, or you kind of feel like that, because it's like, fuck, there's a lot to kind of try and understand and catch up. I have to know what that faction is and that faction is and this faction. And they're not like, you look at like the Eldar in Warhammer 40k, you kind of instantly know what elves are, even if they're in space. You kind of get an idea of what they can do, that they're going to be a certain kind of way. It's like orcs, you know what way. A space orc isn't that much different from a fucking normal orc, like even from a Tolkien orc, you know. So you have that shortcut there. Whereas with Battletech, I don't think that shortcut is there. There's some kind of things where they're like, oh, this is like based on, like, say, China, or this is based on that country, and you kind of go, all right, so they kind of have like a samurai culture in that kind of, you know. But I don't know, it's a fucking long story. Like we were saying, it just wasn't for us.
I find game playing is supposed to be like entertaining, fun, and all the rest, and like if you play, say, I don't know, D&D, or if you play kind of a one shot, if you play any of those kind of things, you end up like, when you finish, you kind of go, Jesus Christ, was that like 3.5 hours? You feel like it. Whereas
God, I felt like
this was, how long were you playing for?
It was about 3 hours.
Honest to God, I swear to Christ, it felt like 3 days. I was nearly crying by the end of it. I was like, Jesus fucking Christ.
It was amazingly boring. And like, I mean, that was with 2 mechs.
And that was with us having snacks and drinks available and having music on the background and like other entertainment going at the same time, and I was still like, oh my God. Now that might say something about me, about like I'm an absolute cretin that can't.
I don't think intelligence has anything to do with it, because it was just a thing. A game should be fun. Like, I mean, this is the thing that I will give Warhammer, what they've been doing for years, is they keep trying to simplify the game without making it simple. So I think that's the way some of the best games that you play on a computer, they're not overly fucking complicated. Like, Pac-Man. But even like role-playing games, Skyrim is not a complicated game. Zelda is not a complicated game.
It's a
Mario,
kid's game, but
you know what to do straight away. It brings you along with the mechanics of it. You learn how to play the game in your first couple of bits that you're doing, and then you apply what you learn in the game to, say, bosses or whatever, right? Good game mechanics. That's not in Battletech. Battletech, it's just like, fucking do this. Warhammer does it to a certain degree, because you have to collect the models. And when you're collecting the models, you can learn about them. And even in the lore, you kind of know, all right, say this guy, he's like a fucking... In the orcs, they have I can't even remember what they're, burner boys, right? They obviously got flamethrowers. It's nearly kind of like, right, flamethrowers are going to be good up close. It's obviously they're not going to be long range, you know? So you look into it, you can learn the rules to your miniatures before you play them. With this, all the miniatures look the fucking same, even though they were slightly different.
You're going to have somebody going, you're racist, can't you see the differences? Or you're just saying all mechs look the same to me.
I painted them up and they weren't great fun, because it was just like, slap the fucking paint on them and kind of like try and make it look. Now, you could really get into put loads of designs on them, but I found that the details were so bad that it wasn't separated between certain things. Like, it made me appreciate how good Games Workshop models actually are cast. There's nothing horribly wrong with them, they're just not good. They're not great. Well, actually, you know, they're just not even good. They're a little bit bendy as well. They're like a soft kind of plastic thing. I don't know, I just didn't really like them. I didn't enjoy painting them. Now, Warhammer ripped off Battletech as well, and they have like Adeptus Titanicus, which is their Titan robots. Now, can you see one of those over there? Obviously you can't show it here, but I have like a knight. That's like their version of Battletech, one of those. Now,
it's like 10 times cooler.
There's a big difference in what they've done, and even with those, there's a whole lore behind. You know, the lore is even good because it's like they're like medieval knights, or they think of themselves as being medieval knights, and they're part of like houses. So you got a whole Game of Thrones thing going on with some of them as well. And it's all that there's not many of these things left. It's just like really rich houses had them, because they don't make them anymore because these things are 10,000 years old. But there's just something a lot cool. I don't know, it's the aesthetics with it.
Yeah, it's probably a combination of everything. It's like from a design point of view, they're certainly a little bit more interesting looking.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I do think Battletech is. It's more for the. I don't want to say this to insult a lot of people, but I feel like if you like military war.
Yes, that's what. Yeah.
RAF airplanes.
It's a war game. Yeah, that's exactly.
You know, that kind of a thing where it's like proper, like sort of you're setting out like a war sort of you're in a war room basically, and you're plotting out a military strategic operations, which is something even in computer games that's something I mean, like you said, I'm very much. Give me Mario, give me Sonic, give me something like that. That's a nice fucking cheerful platformer. If you give me something that's a strategic military thing, I can't do it. I've no patience. Even in games where it's like shoot 'em up games and you're meant to do a sneak to try and get past someone, I'm very much that I can't sneak. I'll just fucking run.
But most people don't like sneak or stealth games, and it's when it's put in, people think it's just thrown in there. It ruins the flow of games. But it's all these things that we're saying about Battletech, I don't blame Battletech for it.
It suits a certain type of person. It just doesn't suit us.
What I do blame is the people recommending it to people that are leaving 40k or looking for an alternative to 40k, because the games are so vastly different. It's like turning around to someone that plays Call of Duty and recommending Arma to him. Arma is like a fucking army simulator. Whereas Call of Duty, there is no reality around Call of Duty. It's a fast-paced arcade shooter, really, with it. And I think to a certain extent, Warhammer is a little bit like that. Well, obviously it's not. It's like, but it's not the Call of Duty of war games. But it kind of is in the popularity.
Even further than that, I'd say it's more like proper strategic, like fucking, tank driver simulator versus
that's
Super
it,
Meat Boy kind of a thing.
Yeah.
To me it's that jargon.
But that's what Battletech was meant to be, where it is like it's meant to be a tank on legs, so that's why it's slow and it moves a certain way. And I remember playing the computer game of it years ago. There's fucking a load of games out now around Battletech, and like Mech Warrior is the other variant. There's an RPG of it and stuff. But it's just, if you're expecting something similar to Warhammer and you go and you do this and people are saying, look, it's cheaper than Warhammer to get into, which it is. But it is so different. The lore is so different as well. So I think a lot of people shouldn't be recommended if someone's saying, I want a game similar to Warhammer. What is it? Because all that happens is, like us, you go off and you play it and you kind of
get a bit disappointed.
Fuck that. I don't want to, because your expectations are slightly skewed about
What would you recommend then?
If people didn't want to play Warhammer,
well, if they were, I want to move out and
one-page rules, I think, definitely. If you're pissed off with like constant updates with rules and all that, but you still like some of the mechanics of Warhammer, one-page rules, definitely. It's free. It's basically, they robbed Warhammer and just simplified the rules. So every single model that you have, you can play in one-page rules. The armies are the same. The one thing I don't really like about one-page rules compared to Warhammer is the stats are kind of like nearly a lot of the same ones. So it's like, say in Warhammer you have different kind of like roles for like hitting someone with a knife compared to hitting them with a bazooka, whereas in one-page rules it's the same thing. So I don't think it gives as much flavour to the different characters, and as well it's like you kind of build your character in it. So like, say you got me Vashtor for Christmas, which is a demon in Warhammer 40k. His stats are like all over, and he's got like all different abilities in Warhammer 40k. Use him in one-page rules and he's just very generic. He doesn't have all those. It's just like,
I can kill you.
Yeah, whereas like you just want to have something that's a bit unique, or that has to have something a bit different. If you're after spending the money on them, like as well, you want it for the difference with it. But one-page rules, I think, is probably the closest that I've tried or read up on. Now, if it was like fantasy battles, there's like Kings of War. There's a load of things like that are similar to Warhammer Fantasy. But like one-page rules, definitely the easiest to get into, and that's what I think we'll talk about. We'll talk about it now actually, because we played that for a while. But it was the thing that I like. The army building is great in one-page rules. You can fucking have anything you want in it. You can create your own characters if you want with their army builder. But like I was saying, there's just not as much flavour to the armies. So say like we were playing Age of Sigmar there a while ago with your Night Hunt. Like you started figuring out all the different abilities that you could do and all the different strategies that you could do when we're playing it. there's not as much as that in one-page rules. It is just very much kind of like, you know, like what one-page rules people say has going for it is alternating activations, which Warhammer doesn't. But now, whereas at one point I was like, yeah, I think that's better. Now I'm kind of like, it doesn't really make too much of a difference. Like, we went back playing Age of Sigmar, and I loved it. I don't know about you, I really enjoyed it there. The last time we were playing it, to the point where I'm kind of like, oh yeah, no, straight back into Warhammer. You know, where it's like, it's because before when we were playing Warhammer, I was leaving out a lot of the more complicated rules because I thought...
Because I was dense.
No, it was just like with you getting into it, I thought maybe kind of like you bring that in, but then when you take those out of it, it's just like, ugh, it's a bit dull. And that's kind of one-page rules, where it's not that it's dull, it's just like, there's something lacking in it.
Yeah.
But when you have all the different bits in Age of Sigmar, I think it's just nice. And I think there's a method to it. Like, say I collect Gloom Spike Gits, so there's a whole thing. I didn't do it when we were playing last time, where it's like the bad moon. So the bad moon can be in different phases. So if it's like in certain thing, it has an effect over your whole army. There's just a lot of weird things that go on with it, and like whereas there's nothing really. I don't know. Maybe there is a rule like that in the advanced rules, one-page rules, but I didn't come across it. So yeah, basically I'd say that kind of like one-page rules is close, it's good. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Like, if you want a quick game, I think it's really good. And as well, it's probably the whole thing, say 2,000 points of an army in one-page rules would be the equivalent of a 1,000-point army in Warhammer. So if you don't want to build, and as well you can use whatever models you want, and if you have a 3D printer, they have a thing on their Patreon where they basically give you an army nearly every month, or two armies every month to print off if you're on it, which is really good. So it's very modern, I think, iteration of wargaming, and it's after bringing wargaming into the 3D printing era. I think I think they could potentially be big competitors to Warhammer over time, but it's just Warhammer. You like Warhammer, you like the lore. The game is actually, or for as much as we bitch and moan about it, it is actually quite good. When there's something about it, where it's like it's been around for 40 years. You know, whatever they might do to fuck up certain aspects of it, it's still Warhammer.
Yeah.
You know?
That's, I think, as well, it probably panders more to the sort of the dual aspect of people's interests, where you have the slightly creative side, where you can just, and it's an individual thing as well, where you can sit down, paint your figurines, and you can kind of get lost in your own world and do whatever you like and turn it into your own thing. But then you have the sort of the group communal thing of like playing a game with someone else. So you kind of, you know, you can be your introverted self painting your miniatures, and then you can go out and have clashes with your friends and try and beat the shit out of them with your figurines.
It's one of the big things I think with Warhammer is the miniatures. The miniatures, quite on, there's fucking nothing compares to them. They are really good. There's some 3D companies out there that have like really good miniatures as well, and like Mantic have a great fantasy range, and they have, I think it's, I can't think of it might be Infinity or something like that. I think their take on Warhammer 40k, but you look at it and it's kind of like, we've got Warhammer at home, kind of thing, you know. They're fine, they're a nice model, but they don't have that
the absolute level of detail
that like Warhammer has in it. And to a certain point you kind of go, you know, the whole thing, you get what you pay for is true. Like, I mean, things aren't cheap nowadays. They definitely aren't cheap. If you want like really good, if you want good miniatures that are cast well, you're going to pay for them.
Now, you obviously have been into Warhammer since almost pretty much the very start, when there was like metal figurines. And
they were always expensive.
Well, how do they compare?
Oh, the plastic ones, the detail in the plastic ones now, you can't compare. Like the metal ones, you can, and as well the metal ones were all hand sculpted. Now I know there's a lot of these ones are hand sculpted as well, but like I'd imagine that there's like, say, 3D embellishments, you know, on it. But like, Jesus, like the design on some of the ones now, and the detail, and like the goblins, like with the Gloom Spike Gits,
they're so tiny.
There's there's, I can see him there, like Skagroth, the Loon King, and like the amount of things that are going on, even just with little squigs holding his cape and things. Now the old ones, they have a lot of whimsy, they're a little bit more cartoony, the metal ones, but as well they were fucking really expensive at the time. I don't think the price has actually gone up too much. I think it's probably gone up with inflation and probably plus a little bit, but like, I mean, I couldn't afford to build a full Warhammer army when I was a kid. There was no fucking way.
You weren't earning like full wage when you were a kid.
I know, but like it was just that they were like they were super expensive, and as well because they were metal, they kind of felt like there was a bit more in them or something
See,
like that.
that's
You know?
what I was going to ask as well. Like, because I mean, I'm kind of, you know, the way I am. I'm very much a skinflint, and I'm always horrified by the price of everything. Whereas I'd feel at least if they were like die-cast metal models, you'd be kind of going, well,
Yeah,
there's
metal
a bit
ones bring problems of their own. But sometimes they're very hard to paint. You might that they're a fucking nightmare. If you were to get a big thing, like say you have night hunt, Lady Audio, you couldn't do that in metal.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be
Because
too fine, I
It'd
suppose.
bend,
wouldn't it?
underneath the weight of, but you get loads of different parts of that to put together. I remember it was like a fucking a dragon. I can't remember what it was, but it might have been an orc on a dragon thing. But the neck was like long, and it was about like say 3 or 4 inches with the head, and the head was bigger than the neck, so it was really heavy on it. So like I had to get like fucking, it wasn't even super glue. It was, I can't even remember what the type of glue it was, but it was industrial fucking glue to stick it together, and it just fucked up the look of the model, you know. So you were kind of pushed into those things to do it. So some of the metal models, they look cool and the idea is nice on, but the practicality of some of them was just,
I suppose, it's just, like, as I said, it's just you always kind of feel like if they're made out of metal, well, there's more quality or something, you know what I mean? But obviously you lose out on the design because you
the
can't get the
detail,
fine detail.
I think they're harder to cut with the plastic ones. Like some of the plastic ones are just, and as well they can do them cheaper. Then I think
don't fucking sell them cheaper.
Well, you get more of them in a box. Beforehand, it was like you get a Warhammer thing, and it was like one of them. So say Chaos Warriors, that they started doing plastic kits as it went on because they were doing stuff with Hasbro, from what I can remember. But if you were fucking doing kind of like building up a Chaos army, which I was trying to do at one stage, you were getting like individual Chaos Warriors, which were probably, I think they were 15 quid.
Jesus, that's a lot for back then as well.
At the time, yeah. So, like, to have one regiment of it, you're talking maybe £150, maybe £100
There's no
at the
kid
time.
going to be able to afford it. There's very few adults who would
Now,
afford
if you were
it at the
buying
time,
10 of them, I think it's around €40. So it probably works out cheaper, like.
Yeah.
So look, we're having massive fucking difficulties with this. Is like around the 4th or the 5th time we had to stop it because like Adobe is acting an utter fucking prick and constantly crashing. So yeah, look, some things up. Battletech bad.
Yeah.
But do you want to play it again?
No, your grand thanks. It's fine for certain people. It's the same way I'm not into like model trains or anything like that. I'm just not into Battletech, and I kind of put it on a par with
But
that.
yeah, look, sum it up quick because it's going to crash again. It's look, Battletech weren't great fans of it. We ended up going back to Warhammer after trying lots of different things. So sometimes the grass isn't greener on the other side.
Yes.
At all. So yeah, look, if you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe. We're going to have more podcasts coming out, obviously. As we're going along, and go over and check out the blog. I don't know what way the blog is going. I just wanted to do it for fun because I haven't done a blog in a long time, and I know there's probably people say there's not a lot of people reading out there, but even if 1 or 2 people read it, that's really all I care about. Yes. It's the same with podcasts. We just want to go back to the internet in the 2000s. Yes. So look, thank you for listening, and we will see you again.